locker next door. Maya had always been a cautious student at Riverside High, but nothing could have prepared her for the strange occurrences that began her freshman year. It started subtly soft rattling noises from the locker directly next to hers. At first, she shrugged it off as someone carelessly closing their locker or a loose hinge, but the sound soon became impossible to ignore. Every day, precisely at 3:07 p.m., the locker would shake violently, as though something or someone inside was desperate to get out. Curiosity gnawed at her. Maya began observing it discreetly, noticing that the locker never opened during normal school hours, and no one ever seemed to claim it. Rumors floated around the halls. Some said a student had gone missing decades ago and might be connected, though nobody could verify the story. Others laughed it off as a prank, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the locker was alive. One rainy afternoon, driven by an uneasy mix of fear and determination, she decided to open it. Her fingers trembled as the lock clicked open, and she expected to see some forgotten textbooks or janitorial supplies. Instead, the locker was eerily empty except for a small crumpled note lying at the bottom. In shaky, almost childlike handwriting, it read, "I'm still here. Don't tell anyone." A chill shot down her spine. Maya dropped the note, heart hammering. The air around her seemed to thicken, as if the empty locker had swallowed the sound of the hallway. That night, in her bedroom, she couldn't sleep. Strange whispers echoed through the room, repeating her name in a distorted, hollow tone. Each whisper felt closer than the last, like someone or something was moving just beyond her vision. The next day, she returned to the locker, hoping it had been a nightmare. But the rattling was gone. Oddly, other students now avoided the locker entirely, crossing to the other side of the hall without explanation. Some teachers even whispered about weird energy in that section of the hallway, though no one could articulate why. Weeks passed, and Maya tried to ignore it. Yet the memory of the note and those whispers haunted her. She began noticing strange details, faint handprints on the locker when it was supposed to be empty, shadows moving at the corner of her vision even during the day. It became clear that whatever had been inside the locker was still watching her. No one else could see it, and no one else would believe her. The locker, seemingly ordinary, held a presence that refused to leave. And Maya knew that as long as she walked past it, it would never stop calling her name. 2. The night janitor Ethan had recently taken a job as the night security guard at Lincoln High, a school with long, echoing hallways and a history that made locals whisper. The students were gone, the lockers silent, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist. At first, Ethan thought it would be a simple, boring job: monitor the cameras, do a few rounds, and head home. But he quickly realized something was off. The first night, he heard footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. They weren't soft like someone sneaking, they were deliberate, heavy, and slow. At first, he assumed it was a student who had stayed late, but when he checked every classroom, every bathroom, every storage room, the halls were completely empty. Then, he saw her. Or rather, him, a figure dressed in the janitor's uniform, pushing a mop down a hallway, moving methodically but almost unnaturally. Ethan called out, "Zirning," assuming it was a colleague, but the figure stopped. Slowly, it turned its head toward him, and Ethan froze. Where the eyes should have been, there was only black voids, like empty pits staring straight through him. The next few nights were worse. No matter what time Ethan arrived, the figure was always there. Sometimes cleaning, sometimes standing in the shadows, never acknowledging him, but always watching. Security cameras didn't show the figure. The footage was clean, only Ethan patrolling. But in the reflection of the polished floors, the shadow lingered, stretching unnaturally, inching closer every time he walked past. One particularly stormy night, Ethan heard whispering, low, guttural, almost like hundreds of voices layered together, coming from the janitor's closet, summoning courage. He opened the door, expecting to find tools or cleaning supplies. Instead, the closet was empty, except for hundreds of small, hand-sized holes drilled into the walls, each black as the figure's eyes. The whispers grew louder, now saying his name, repeating it in a distorted echo, promising he would never leave. Panicked, Ethan tried to report the occurrences, but no one believed him. Staff laughed it off as stress or imagination. Yet, every night, he returned, and the figure was always there. Over time, Ethan realized it wasn't just watching, it was waiting, feeding off his fear, slowly teaching him that Lincoln High's true occupants were never the students. Now, Ethan walks the halls with a permanent chill, his eyes always darting to the shadows. The night janitor isn't a man. It's something older, something patient, something that has been cleaning these halls far longer than any living employee. And it knows his name. 3. The Phantom Bell. Liam had always been an early riser at Crestwood High, preferring to get to class before the crowds. But one morning, as he entered the empty school, he heard something that made his stomach twist, a bell ringing, loud and clear, even though it wasn't time for classes. Confused, he checked the clock. It read 6:03 a.m. No students, no teachers, and yet the bell echoed through the hallways like a warning. At first, he thought it was some old wiring problem. But the next day, the same thing happened. The bell rang at exactly 6:03 a.m., followed by a faint metallic scraping sound coming from the classrooms. Liam began paying closer attention and noticed a pattern. The bell always rang before someone disappeared. It started with a substitute teacher named Mr. Klein, who never returned after the early morning bell. Then, a janitor vanished without a trace, leaving only a bucket of water on the floor. The mop standing perfectly upright, and a faint smell of burning metal. No one could explain their disappearances. Students whispered that the bell was cursed, but most dismissed it as silly superstition except Liam. Determined to uncover the truth, Liam decided to stay after hours. At exactly 6:03, the bell rang again, echoing through the halls. He followed the sound to the old auditorium, where dust floated in the air and the stage curtains hung tattered. There he saw something impossible, a shadowy figure emerging from the bell itself, rising as if the ringing had summoned it. The figure had no face, only a hollow darkness, and its long, clawed fingers scraped against the walls as it moved. Liam froze, realizing that the bell wasn't just a warning, it was a portal. The figure stepped closer, its presence sucking the warmth from the air. He tried to run, but the auditorium door slammed shut, trapping him inside. The bell rang again, louder, vibrating through his chest, and he felt himself being pulled toward it, his screams swallowed by the ringing. The next morning, Liam's backpack was found in the hallway, but there was no sign of him. Teachers chalked it up to him skipping school, yet the custodian swore he could still hear faint ringing whenever he walked past the auditorium. Students now avoid Crestwood's early hours, fearing the phantom bell, whispering that it doesn't just ring, it hunts. No one knows how many it has taken. The bell waits silently for the next unlucky soul foolish enough to hear it first. 4. Detention with No End. Sophia had always been a rule follower at Hawthorne High, but one afternoon, a careless prank landed her in detention. The room was empty except for the old wooden desks and a single flickering fluorescent light. The teacher, Mr. Hargrove, handed her a stack of worksheets and left without a word, locking the door behind him. At first, she thought it would be a boring hour, and it should have been, but that was when the nightmare began. She finished the worksheets quickly, only to realize that the clock on the wall didn't move. No seconds, no minutes, just a frozen, mocking 3:17 p.m. Confused, Sophia tried to leave, but the door was jammed, impossible to open. She banged on it, yelled for help, but the hallways were eerily silent. Then she noticed the other desks, they weren't empty. Faint, almost translucent figures sat in them, hunched over their papers, writing with no sound. Their heads slowly lifted, revealing hollow faces with empty black eyes that fixed on her. Panicking, Sophia ran to the door again, only to feel the temperature drop drastically. Her breath fogged in the icy air, and a low whisper began echoing through the room. Detention never ends. She stumbled back to her desk, trying to hide, but the whispers grew louder, repeating her name, mocking her. The figures started standing, gliding silently across the floor, moving closer with each step. Hours, or maybe days, seemed to pass. Time had no meaning in that room. Sophia tried everything, breaking windows, screaming, banging on the walls, but nothing worked. Every attempt to escape only made the figures multiply, surrounding her in a suffocating circle. Their whispers became chants, demanding obedience, forcing her to pick up a pen and write on the same endless worksheets over and over. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she collapsed at her desk. When she woke, everything was exactly the same. The desk, the frozen clock, the spectral students. She realized the horrifying truth. This detention didn't just punish misbehavior, it trapped the soul. Every second was infinite, every moment a repetition, a prison with no release. Weeks later, a new student was assigned detention. When they entered the room, they saw a pale, frightened girl sitting at a desk, whispering to herself, pen moving across paper, her eyes hollow and vacant. It was Sophia. And every time someone new enters, the room feeds on fear, growing hungrier, keeping her trapped in the endless cycle. 5. The vanishing classmate Jordan had always been close with his classmate, Elena, at Maplewood High. She was quiet, artistic, and had an uncanny way of disappearing from conversations without anyone noticing. One day during lunch, Jordan noticed that Elena wasn't at her usual table. He called her name, but there was no response. Thinking she had gone to the library, he shrugged it off until the next day. She was missing again. Over the next week, Elena's disappearances became more frequent. She would vanish mid-class, mid-conversation, even mid-step in the hallway. Students started whispering about it, saying things like, "She's fading," or "I saw her shadow but not her body." Jordan tried to convince himself it was a joke, or some odd form of anxiety, but deep down, he felt something sinister was at play. One rainy afternoon, Jordan stayed after school, determined to find her. He followed faint footprints to the old janitor's storage room, a place students rarely entered. There, he saw her, but not fully. Elena's form flickered, like an old TV losing signal. Her eyes were distant, hollow, and her mouth opened as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Terrified, Jordan reached out. His hand passed through her shoulder, and she shivered violently, her form destabilizing further. A whisper echoed in his mind, chilling him. "Don't follow me, or you'll vanish too." Ignoring the warning, he grabbed her arm, and the room warped. Walls stretched unnaturally, lockers melted into shadows, and the fluorescent lights twisted into pale, flickering beams that felt alive. Elena screamed, though the sound wasn't audible, and in a blink, she was gone. In her place, the faint outline of a girl remained, pressing against the air like a ghost, trapped between dimensions. Jordan ran to the exit, only to find the hallways empty, distorted. Every classroom door was locked, and every window reflected only darkness. He realized that Elena hadn't just disappeared. She had been pulled into something old, something hidden within the school's walls. The next day, Jordan told his friends what had happened. Nobody believed him, and Elena's absence was officially chalked up to her moving away. But Jordan knew the truth. She hadn't left. She was still in the school, trapped between reality and something else, silently calling for help that no one could hear. Now sometimes, when the hallways are empty and the wind howls through Maplewood High, students swear they see a flickering shadow of a girl in the corner of their vision. And if you look too closely, she stares back with eyes that beg you not to follow. 6. Whispers from the basement. Aiden had always been curious about the old basement of Evergreen High, a place students were strictly forbidden to enter. The principal claimed it was off-limits for safety reasons, but rumors told a darker story, strange sounds, faint lights flickering, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. One rainy evening, Aiden stayed late after drama practice, determined to see what was hidden below. The stairwell leading to the basement was narrow, musty, and filled with the smell of damp concrete. As he descended, a cold draft brushed against his neck, sending shivers down his spine. The lights flickered violently, and then, in the shadows at the bottom of the stairs, he saw it. A faint glow emanating from the far corner, accompanied by low, unintelligible whispers. At first, he thought it might be the janitor or another student playing a prank, but the whispers grew louder, circling him, repeating his name in a strange, warped tone. Each repetition seemed to make the basement darker, the walls stretching and warping as though the room itself were alive. He took a cautious step forward, and the whispers became voices of children, crying, pleading, and begging him not to come closer. Aiden followed the glow to an old, rusted filing cabinet, which appeared to move slightly, almost as if something or someone inside was struggling to escape. The whispers now felt like they were inside his head, each one pulling at his thoughts, twisting them, urging him to open the cabinet. Hesitant but compelled, he yanked it open. Inside, the light was blinding, and for a split second, he saw hundreds of pale, expressionless faces, all pressed against an unseen barrier, eyes wide with fear. A sudden chill slammed into him, and the cabinet door slammed shut, throwing him backward. He scrambled to the stairs, but the basement seemed endless now. Shadows shifted along the walls, taking forms that resembled twisted versions of students he knew. The whispers turned into hisses. "You shouldn't have come, you're next." When Aiden finally stumbled out of the basement, gasping for air, the hallway above was empty and silent. No one had seen him enter, and the lights flickered normally again, as if the basement had never been entered. But he could still hear them, the whispers echoing faintly in his mind, growing louder whenever he walked past the stairwell. Now, every time Aiden passes the basement doors, he feels unseen eyes watching him from below. He knows that whatever is trapped down there is patient, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too far. And he fears that one day the whispers will call him back, and this time he won't escape. 7. The bleachers that watch. Nina had always loved sports, especially Friday night games at Holloway High, but the old bleachers behind the stadium had always given her an uneasy feeling. The wood was warped and creaked unnaturally, and students whispered that something strange happened there after dark. Most dismissed it as superstition, but Nina learned the hard way that some legends are terrifyingly real. It started during a late practice. Nina stayed behind to retrieve a ball, walking toward the empty bleachers. As she climbed the steps, she felt the faint sensation of being watched. The stadium lights flickered, and the shadows of the bleachers stretched unnaturally, like long fingers reaching for her. When she looked around, no one was there, but the feeling didn't leave. The next night, she returned with a friend, trying to prove she was overreacting. As they sat on the top row, a cold breeze swept across the stands, even though there was no wind. Then she noticed its small, dark shapes, barely visible, seated in the empty bleachers, all facing her. She blinked, and they seemed to shift closer. Her friend laughed nervously, but Nina's stomach dropped. There was something alive in those wooden seats, something waiting. Over the next week, strange events escalated. Balls would roll mysteriously across the field. Footsteps echoed when the stadium was empty, and shadows seemed to linger, moving just at the edge of vision. Nina noticed a pattern. Whenever she walked past the bleachers alone, she could swear the wood shifted slightly, as though the stands themselves were breathing, leaning toward her, observing. One evening, she stayed late after practice again. The stadium was quiet, except for the creaking of the old bleachers. She climbed them, heart pounding, and suddenly, every shadow coalesced into humanoid shapes. They weren't solid, just dark silhouettes, but they stared at her with intensity. The air grew thick, cold, and heavy. She tried to run, but the steps beneath her seemed endless, stretching upward, trapping her in a nightmarish loop. When she finally escaped the bleachers, gasping on the field, she looked back. The silhouettes didn't move. They simply watched, motionless, their eyes dark voids, waiting for her to return. From that day on, Nina avoided the stadium after dark, but sometimes, late at night, she swore she could hear whispers carried by the wind. "We see you, always." The bleachers had a secret. They weren't just old wood and nails. They were alive, patient, and eternal, observing every student who dared enter, and anyone who lingers too long risks being noticed and never leaving.